Hey guys, Irene here. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I'm gonna show you an updated skin retouching tutorial. I'm gonna show you how I retouch the skin using only dodge and burn technique. This is a sort of a more high-end technique. It's a little bit more complicated than some of the other tutorials that I showed you guys previously on my channel. But I'm gonna try my best to explain this in a very easy way. I'm gonna split this into a few sections and show you guys step by step how I edit the skin. So yeah, let's get started. So the first step is understanding how the dodge and burn works for skin retouching. And it is quite simple. All we're gonna be doing is trying to even out the skin tone by adding lightness to areas that are too dark and adding some darkness to areas that are too bright. I want to show you guys a different picture just very quickly because you can really see some of the imperfections here, especially on her cheek. So I want you guys to pay attention to this area over here. If I get a little bit closer, you'll notice that she has some of the imperfections in this area on her cheek. The way that the pimples work is that they're usually raised a little bit more above normal skin. So if we look, let's say at this spot right here, you'll see that we see a little bit of a highlight right in the middle and then some darkness all around it. Let me zoom in even closer. Again, there's a highlight at the very top of the pimple and then we see some of the darkness around it. This is where dodge and burn comes into the picture to correct the skin. I want you guys to pay attention to the red circle that I outlined. So first I'm gonna take away the brightness with some of the shadow, and then I'm gonna take away some of the shadow with the brightness. And as you can see, that evens out the skin tone right away and we no longer see the pimples. The same thing happens on the bigger areas on the face as well. A lot of people have sunken in under eyes, which makes that area a lot darker than the rest of the face. I circled up that area right here. All I did is added a little bit of highlight in that area, and look at the difference. Look at before and after. We are able to correct that sunken in area with just adding a little bit of highlight, and we do not have to compensate with taking out some of that skin texture. If we zoom in, we're still leaving all of that skin texture that was there and making it look super natural, and we're just really correcting the skin with balancing out the darker and the lighter areas. The step 2 is going to be making some Photoshop actions that are going to help us speed up the process of this retouch. We're going to be making an action for highlighting, an action for adding shadows, and another action that's going to let us see the skin a little bit better and see those differences between the lightness and the darkness a lot easier. To create your own actions, you're going to go into Windows, then Actions. And if you've never played with actions before, you're going to have all of your default ones open. You can just click this button to hide it in the folder. And I'm going to create a new folder by clicking this right here. And I'm going to call it Dodge and Burn Skin. Okay, you can call it whatever you want, skin retouch. I'm gonna press OK, and that created our new folder. The first action I'm gonna make is gonna be a very contrasting black and white layer that's gonna help us see those differences between the bright and darker parts of the skin really well. So to start the recording of the action, you're gonna press this button right here, and I'm gonna call it the contrast layer. And then you can press record. You're going to see this red button go off. That means that we are starting to record all of our actions. The first thing I'm going to do is click on the adjustment layers, and I'm going to choose solid color. Now here we're going to choose something that's gray, white, or black and white, and then press OK. And then on the blending mode, we're going to choose color. The next adjustment layer I'm going to choose is brightness and contrast. I'm going to press here use legacy, and I'm going to make this image quite contrasting. Can increase the brightness a little bit as well. Just about that. So that looks really good. And now all I'm gonna do is make a group and I'm gonna put both of these in a group just like that, and then kind of bring it up so that I can easily toggle between them. So I'm gonna stop my recording, and there's my contrast layer. So I'll show you guys if I delete this and I go to the contrast layer, I press play, it automatically plays everything that we've done. And again, I can just kind of bring it back into the group, and I can toggle between both of these. I always like to have this option of toggling between my contrast layer and the background layer so I can see what it looks like in real life. The next action I'm going to create is a highlight action that's going to help us brighten up some of the darker spots. So again, I'm going to press this, and I'm gonna call it highlight, and press record. The red button is going. That means that anything that we're going to be doing right now is going to be recorded. So I like to do this highlight action with curves. So I'm gonna create an adjustment layer, go to curves. I'm gonna grab it in the very middle and pull it up just a bit like that. Now we're gonna press Control-I to invert the mask, and after that we're gonna change the blending mode to luminosity. I like changing the blending mode to luminosity because now it's not gonna be affecting any of the colors. This layer is strictly gonna be affecting just the lightness or the darkness of the image. I'm gonna also lower the opacity just a little bit. I usually do around 75%. So we're gonna leave it at that. And I'm gonna change the name of this curve to highlight, just so that it's going to be easier for us to understand which one is the highlight and which one is the shadow layer. So I'm going to stop this action, and here we have our highlight action. So if I'm going to delete this right now and I'm going to play the highlight, as you can see, it played everything that we've done, and this is what it does. If you grab the brush, you can get a little bit closer, and let's make it bigger. See, I'm highlighting the area, so the darker area, I'm making it a lot brighter. So this is what the highlight does. And now I'm gonna make the action for the shadow. So the same thing, I'm gonna press this right here, and I'm gonna call it shadow. And I'm gonna press record. Now I'm gonna use the curves as well. So I'm gonna go to my adjustment layers, press curves, but now here I'm gonna go not in the middle but a little bit lower, so right over here about there. I'm gonna press again Control-I to invert the mask, or it's Command-I on the Mac. If you are using Mac, I'm gonna change the blending mode to luminosity, and again I'm gonna switch my opacity to about 75%, and I'm just gonna change the name to shadow. Alright, there we go. So we can stop the action, and there's our shadow. So if I click on it and I want to darken any of the spots, let's say that this is a little bit too bright for me and I want to darken this spot, as you can see, it's applying a little bit more of the shadow to that spot. These actions are very, very mild sort of actions, and that's the whole point. We don't want to go too harsh on these adjustments. It's all in the little tiny adjustments that makes the skin look so natural and so good. Now that we have all of our actions, we're gonna go into the phase 3 of the retouch. We're gonna be actually applying those actions and doing some of the retouch. Alright, so the first thing I'm gonna do is play my contrast layer. So you're just gonna have to click on it and press play. And I'm just gonna bring it back into the group layer. Now I'm gonna click on the background again, then highlight and play my highlight, and make sure that it is under your group, the contrast layer. If it is on top of the contrast layer, it's gonna have slightly different effect, but make sure it is under the contrast layer. Pretty much all of the highlight and shadow actions have to be under the contrast layer, okay? Take a shot every time I say contrast layer. Also, whenever you're choosing your brush, make sure that it's always set to some sort of round soft brush. I'm using the soft round pressure opacity brush right here because I am using a tablet. I'm using Wacom into a small pen and touch. It's a really cheap tablet and it works really great. I highly recommend you guys get some sort of retouching tablet if you are going to be using this technique. If you are using just a mouse or your touchpad on the laptop, it is going to be like 100 times harder for you guys to make this very seamless and very smooth. You can definitely try, and with a lot of practice you probably will be doing this pretty well, but it is so much easier with a tablet. Another tip, that if you are using just your mouse, you might gonna have to play around with your flow, reducing it to something very little, like maybe 10%, or also playing with the opacity, again reducing it to something like 20 or 10%. If you are using a tablet, you don't really have to worry about those. Alright, I'm gonna start with the highlight. I'm gonna zoom in quite close, and I'm gonna start painting where I see darker spots. So I'm gonna start right over here where I see dark spot right by her eye. Another quick tip here is to keep changing the size of your brush. I'm using brackets to change the size. So the bracket to the left side makes the brush smaller, the bracket to the right side makes the brush a lot bigger. I always keep my hands on the keyboard on those brackets to keep changing the size of my brush. The reason why we want to keep changing the size of the brush is because if the area that we are trying to lighten is very small, we want to make the brush small. If the brush is bigger than the area that we're trying to lighten, you might spill into the areas that are normal that we don't need to brighten up. So always make sure that your brush is small and it is the same size as the area we're trying to brighten. A good rule for this would be to keep with the smaller brush rather than the bigger brush. Alright, so I'm taking my time here, really sort of getting in those little tiny areas and brightening them up. You can always toggle over here and then kind of seeing what you've done. See back and forth, see if you've gone a little bit too much or not enough. Again, I will just turn back on that contrasting layer and I'll keep going with the under eye. Another thing that I like doing is going in and out of the image just to see the overall effect. So if I go a little bit further here, I can see the bigger area that need to be brightened, so I can make my brush quite big and just brighten the areas that are bigger. And once those big areas are brightened, I can go zoom in a little bit more and work on the smaller areas even more. Once I'm done with some of the bigger and smaller areas, I can zoom in even further and work on the really tiny areas like these ones over here. I think one of the important things about this technique is kind of realizing where we need to take the darkness out and where we need to still keep it. We do not want to make the image completely flat. We still want to keep some of the important shadows, like the shadows around her nose, for example. Here, let me just zoom out and show you. So for example, the shadow over here around her nose, it can be fixed a little bit. Like this shadow over here is not needed, so we can go ahead and brighten this area right over here. But this shadow just around her nose is needed, because otherwise it's gonna look like the nose is blending into her cheek completely. So it's very important to understand the areas that we actually should not touch and the areas that do need correction. I'm gonna, again, as you guys can see, I keep zooming in and out, constantly changing the size of my brush, and that is the most important thing about here, is to make sure that your retouch is very organic, that you're changing the sizes, you're going in and out to kind of see how the whole image looks. All right, let me zoom out just a little bit to see what we've done here on the under eye. So I want to brighten this area even more, so I'm gonna make another highlight, and I'm gonna keep working on this area right here. I want to just brighten it up just a little bit more. It's definitely a good idea to create multiple layers of the highlights, so that not everything is done on one separate layer. You can create multiple ones for maybe some of the closer up details, maybe some for further away details. It's definitely a good idea to separate some of the layers and don't put everything on one layer. That's why it's so easy to just create those actions and then just play them, and you don't have to worry about doing the whole thing all over again with, like, you know, creating an adjustment layer and inverting the layer and then putting it to luminosity and then lowering the opacity and things like that. This is why I love using Photoshop actions. All right, so there's our little area that we were just working on. So let's take this out, and then let's take this out. So as you can see, that really makes this area look a lot smoother. And I didn't do any of the patch tool or the spot healing brush. I didn't do any of that. The only thing I did is added some highlight to the areas that needed, and that just evens out the skin tone so well. So this whole under eye area was done using only the highlight action, but let me show you the area where I would use both highlight and the shadow, and it's this area right over here. As you can see, it's pretty patchy. We have some dark and bright areas, and if I toggle back onto my contrast layer, you can see it a little bit more. So I'm gonna go ahead and just create another highlight layer, and I'm gonna work separately on that. I'm gonna start with some of the dark spots first, and then when I'm working in the area and I see some of the bright spots, like right over here, there's a little bit of a brighter spot, I'm gonna go ahead and play the shadow action and make sure that it is selected onto the layer mask instead of here, because see, now you can't paint, but if it's selected over here you can. So I'm just gonna go ahead and darken this spot. I really hope you guys can see what I'm doing. I remember when I started using this technique, it was kind of hard for me to understand where the lighter and darker areas are, but the more I used this, the more evident those areas were for me. So if it makes little sense at first, just, you know, keep on practicing, and I'm sure you will be able to see those areas better in the future with more practice. All right, so again, I kind of keep switching between the brush sizes, because there's some really tiny areas and some bigger areas that need brightening and darkening. And then again, I'm gonna go into the shadow, and where I see a little bit of a darker spot, I go ahead and do darken it. I'm just gonna go a little bit closer into some areas, and again, I'm just gonna keep on working on them. Again, just kind of switching between the shadow. See, like this spot right here is such a perfect spot to showcase what this does. So I added quite a lot of shadow there, and look at that. Do you see how it just disappears, that little tiny spot? And if I went a little bit too much, I can go into highlight and then correct some of the darker spots. Again, I just love also watching how these areas just disappear and kind of blur into one seamless color. I just think it's such a great technique. Another tip I can give you guys is to not go too crazy here. Obviously, we want to make the skin look very smooth, but going overboard with some of the smoothness might look really fake as well. So again, I always recommend kind of scaling back on that image and seeing what progress we've done to see if we went too far or not enough. Look at that. Look at that highlight over there. And look at the shadow. It's just, oh, I love watching it disappear, like all of the imperfections. And again, when you go a little bit further, you can work on the bigger areas like I am right now. And then again, you can toggle between the contrast layer and the original to kind of see if we need to do more work. Like after I've toggled it back and forth, I realized that this area right here needs some brightening as well. I think you really have to just kind of train your eye to see those imperfections and see where the light is falling in the wrong places. This area right here is a little bit darker as well, just a bigger area overall. So yeah, I would definitely first go bigger areas and then work on smaller areas. I think that works really, really well. All right, let me go a little bit closer in over here and add some shadow as well. See those little tiny areas where we can see the texture peeking through? We add a little bit of the shadow on the top of those raised areas and it just disappears and blends into the skin. Alright, so I just finished this side of her face. So let's take the contrast layer and let's look at all of these. Alright, that looks really cool, just taking them out. So I'm gonna quickly group all of these layers with highlights and shadow and show you guys the before and after. Alright, so here is before and after for the skin retouch on the right side of her face. So as you can see, it really makes a huge difference and it looks extremely natural. Now actually doing this, I also realized that I need to correct a little bit more on her cheekbone right here and add some highlights. Let's do this right now actually. I'm gonna bring back the contrast layer so I can see this a little bit better. Yes, I'm definitely missing some of the highlights over here. Again, just trying to even out this area. I think in areas like this, the important part is to make sure that the highlight is blending really nicely into the shadow, because we have this contrast between her cheekbone, which is higher, so it is a lot brighter, and then we're kind of blending into this kind of shadowy part underneath her cheekbone. So you gotta make sure that this transition between this bright color and the darker shadow is gonna be really nice and just a smooth transition. All right, I think that looks, oh, that looks so much better. Just look at that. All right, so I'm gonna take out the contrast layer and let's see this again, the before and after. Do you guys see what I mean? I just freaking love doing it. And then again, just doing this more, I'm noticing a few other little spots where I need to put some shadow or some highlight. And again, at first, this looks like a very confusing sort of technique, but the more you're going to be using, the more you're going to train your eye to see the areas that need highlight or shadow. So I'm going to continue the skin retouch on her whole face and then show you guys the before and after on the completed dodge and burn. Alright, so I just finished the face skin retouch, and I could work even more on some of the details here, but that would take just too long, so I'm just going to show you guys what it looks like right now. So I just took off the contrast layer, and here's the before and after of using just Dodge and Burn on the skin. As you can see, it already looks so good. And if we zoom in, you guys can see that we retain all of that skin texture, so it looks extremely natural. Now, I want to show you guys that this can be used not only on the face, the same technique can also be used on the hands and specifically on the lips. I love using this technique on the lips. So let's put back the contrast layer, and again, we can just keep on layering these highlights and shadows over here. I'm going to create a new highlight layer, and I'm gonna start with that. So on her lips, again, where we see a little bit of a darker area, I can go ahead and correct that. Again, I like to just toggle and see what we're getting here. I think it already looks so much better. And now I'm gonna make a shadow one and darken up some spots that are too bright. Like there's a spot over here that's just a little bit too bright. I want a little bit of a nicer transition between that darker and a brighter spot. We can make the sides of the lips a little bit darker. Just make them a little bit more even. Over here where we have these little spots that are a little bit brighter, I would also darken them just a tad. We do not want to make the lips too one-dimensional, but again, some of the areas that stand out a little bit too much, we can correct. Alright, I think that should be it for the lips. So let me show you guys the before and after on the lips. It was these two. So there's the lips, and let me take off the contrast layer. So here's before and after on the lips. Again, it just looks a lot more even, and then we're still retaining all of the texture in the lips. I just think it looks so much better. I'm gonna do the same thing on her hands as well. We don't need a lot, but maybe just a little bit. So again, I'm gonna put back my contrast layer. I'm gonna go with the shadow and just kind of make the transition between this bright spot and the darker skin on the hand a little bit more even, just more of an even transition. So just where those two meet, the brighter and the darker, I'm just gonna add a little bit of the shadow and then maybe a little bit of the highlight in some of the darker areas. Just make that transition a lot more even. And then over here we have the knuckles. We can add a little bit of highlight. Maybe a little bit more over here. You don't want to go too much on the hands. Again, we don't want to make this look you know, too plastic. We don't want to make her look like she's a robot, but we can soften some of the transitions. So let's see what that looks like. See, that's so much better already. Let's add this back on, and I'm gonna add just a little bit more highlight in the few areas over here. And there's a little bit of a line over here. I'm gonna darken it. Alright, that looks great actually. I'm noticing there's this one area right here that I want to darken just a little bit. Alright, that looks great. So let me show you guys the before and after of the whole Dodge and Burn retouch. Alright, so here's before and after of the whole Dodge and Burn. Again, it's such a simple thing, but look how much better this looks. Just look at the before and after. Everything looks smooth and awesome, and we still retain all of that detail. So this is our Dodge and Burn, and now we're gonna move on to the next two steps. We're gonna do some color correction and we're gonna do some minor retouching with the spot healing brush. Alright, so I'm gonna drop all of the skin retouch into this group right here, and then we don't need this contrasting layer anymore, so I can go ahead and delete it. So if we zoom in really close, you'll see that there's a little bit of a different skin in different areas. Right over here underneath her eye, a little bit over here, same here, this spot, and this area above her lip, they have a slightly different color than the rest of her face. They're a little bit more darker, so we need to color correct those areas. I'm gonna show you guys a very, very easy way to do this. I learned this from Anita Sadowska. Again, I'll put her link in the description as well. I highly recommend you check out her editing tutorials as well. They're really good. So all you have to do is create an empty layer right here. And then on the blending mode, we're going to choose color. Now I'm gonna use this tool right here, the sampling tool, and we're gonna sample the skin right over here, the skin that we liked, that it's nice and warm. Now I'm gonna pick up my brush, I'm gonna make it a lot bigger, and we can start painting it on the areas that are discolored. So I'm painting it on top of this area that was a little bit more of that ashy, darker kind of color. So look at the before and after. Do you see how it's changing the color? It's a very subtle difference. So you see the before and after. I hope you guys can see it. Maybe I zoom in a little bit more. Look at the under eye area, how it's changing color. It's a very subtle difference, but to me, a good retouch, it's in those little tiny little things. So I'm gonna do the same on the other eye. I'm gonna sample this warm area here, and then I'm gonna paint it over this darker area to make it blend with the rest of her skin really nicely. Let's see before and after. That looks so much better already. And I'm gonna do the same around her mouth area. So I'm gonna sample the skin here and I'm gonna start painting it, just so it matches with the rest of her skin. Oh, that looks so much better already. So let's see the before and after. You see how that just matches everything really, really nicely. And if I zoom out just a little bit more, yes, that's way, way better. I'm gonna add that layer into that group with all of the skin retouch. Oh, look at the before and after, it's crazy. Okay, so we're gonna do some more finishing touches, and that's gonna be using our spot healing brush tool. So I'm gonna duplicate the layer, and I'm gonna take the spot healing brush, and we're gonna start with this upper lip area. There's a few little hairs that I want to take away, and everyone has hairs above their lip, men or women. Some just have darker and some have lighter hairs that are more noticeable or less noticeable. So the trick here and the tip that I want to give you guys using the brush tool is to make sure that your brush is small. So don't use a big brush like this, right? Use a small brush if the area is small. We do not want to affect any of the good skin. We only want to affect the areas that have an imperfection. So I'm gonna make my brush really small, and I'm only gonna brush it over the imperfection area, okay? So that way we're gonna again retain as much texture as we possibly can, and that's the goal here. We do not want to make the skin look blurry. We want to make sure that we can still see a lot of the texture. And another tip is to not go overboard. We do not want to take away every single little hair. As you can see, I left a few in here because if we make this area too bare and too perfect, again, it's gonna look too plasticky because no one has absolutely perfect skin. So the good idea is to delete some of the things, but maybe leave some of the pores, right? So that's what I'm gonna do here. Again, I'm switching between sizes of the brushes because different areas, some areas are bigger, some areas are smaller. We want to make this look more organic by switching the size of the brush like continuously. So this is what I'm gonna keep doing. Another thing, just like we did with all the other skin retouch, always kind of back it up and toggle between what you've did so you can see if you went too far. Maybe you will need to do a little bit more. So that's what I'm always doing. Any little things like these also, we can just kind of correct them. Like little spot over here on her lip, I can also take this out with the healing brush. Any little annoying areas. I think this was glitter over here, but it's kind of distracting, so I'm gonna take away some of this glitter from her lip as well. Alright, so let's see the before and after. I think this is it. I don't think I need to go more into correcting the stuff here. I think that looks pretty good. We could also go ahead and take out some of the hair over here, but honestly I don't mind it. I think it looks pretty cute. So I like big bushy eyebrows, and I think I'm gonna leave some of the hair over here on her forehead. Again, we can go a little bit more in detail, and maybe there's like few glitter spots over here that are a little bit distracting, so I can go ahead and take them out. But really, I think her skin looks really good right now, so I think I would just leave it at that and just yeah, I think I would leave it at that for the healing brush. Alright, we have a few more steps left. We're gonna do some more dodge and burn, but this time we're gonna do it not to correct the skin tone or the skin texture. We're gonna do it to enhance some of her features. So I'm gonna start with the highlight. Again, I'm just playing my action, and I'm gonna just concentrate on the highlights that I naturally see, and I'm just gonna make them more bright. So over here on the iris, as you can see, I brightened some of the highlights, and I'm gonna do the same on the other eye. One tip I have here for you guys, don't go too much on the whites of the eye, and don't go on the whole iris. Again, mostly concentrate on the highlights only. So same thing over here on her makeup. I'm gonna brighten some of the areas that are already pretty bright. I'm gonna brighten a little bit in the inner corner to make it shine, make it sparkle. Her nose bridge over here has a little bit of the highlight, so I'm gonna intensify it. Be careful with nose highlighting. You don't want to go overboard, and you want to stick with thinner lines rather than thicker lines, because if I make this line really thick, if I highlight here, I'm gonna show you guys quickly, so I'm gonna make another highlight. If I highlight her whole nose like this, it's gonna make it look wider than it is. See, it's making the nose wider. We only want to highlight in the areas where we naturally see the highlight. So you see, I just made the highlight just a little bit more bright rather than highlighting in areas that you don't need it. So I would say stick to thinner lines on the nose and only highlight where you already see the natural one. I'm gonna highlight her lip a little bit as well, just kind of where I see, again, the natural highlight. I'm gonna repeat myself a lot because this is all it is. We're just seeing where we naturally have bright spots, and we're just making them brighter. A little bit underneath her eyebrow to lift it up. Again, maybe we can add a little bit more to her cheekbone area. I like to highlight the chin a little bit as well. Very, very subtle little changes. We don't want to go overboard with this. So this is before and after on the highlighting on the face, and I would leave it at that. I wouldn't go more. I mean, it is personal preference as well, so if you like that very strong highlighting, go ahead, but I personally like to keep it more natural nowadays. So now I'm gonna do some shadowing or burning, and so I played my shadow action, and then I'm just gonna go ahead and darken the lash line just a little bit, and even paint the shadow on her eyelashes. I also like to use the highlight and shadow on the eyebrows to correct them a little bit. So over here you see this eyebrow is just a little bit wonky, so I'm gonna take the highlight and I'm gonna brighten up this spot right here. This way it's gonna look very, very natural. So I'm just brightening this spot to make the eyebrow look a little bit more even, and then with the shadow I'm gonna add some shadows over here. and I'm almost mimicking the eyebrow hairs. So I'm just kind of stroking this to make it look like there's eyebrow hairs. All right, so look at that. Look at that. Do you see how that corrected the eyebrow? And it looks so, so natural. All right, so let me zoom out and show you guys the before and after of this dodge and burn. So here's before and after of a little bit of dodge and burn on the face. So that looks awesome. I'm gonna add this into that second group as well. Just look at that before and after. Okay, now final step for my skin retouch. I like to go ahead and play around with the colors just a little bit, and it does improve the overall skin retouch as well. I'm gonna go into selective color. So over here on the adjustment layers, I'm gonna choose selective color. Two colors that affect the skin is the reds and the yellows. I start with the reds, especially for people with darker skin color. Reds will affect it really, really well, and you can make the skin look warm and more vibrant with the reds. So I'm gonna make sure that it's also an absolute and not on relative here. So I'm gonna make it a little bit darker, and I'm gonna give it some more red and a little bit more of a yellow color. Just a little bit like that. Oh, make sure that it's underneath, oops. Make sure that this is underneath the group, and it's gonna affect it a little bit better. All right, so again, I'm gonna give it some more yellow and a little bit more of that red. And you can make it a little bit darker. And look at that. Look at that before and after. Do you see how it just makes the skin look so much more alive and warm? I love what it does. We can also go into yellows and also just kind of bump up the yellows a little bit more. Give them a little bit of the red. Yeah, there we go. And then another one that I like to do is whites. I like to make whites just a little bit brighter, and it kind of picks up some of the highlights and makes them pop even more. So yeah, I'm just gonna make it like this. All right, here we go. So this is just what we added with selective color. Again, I just think it makes the skin pop so much more and makes it look so much more alive. All right, so this is the finished skin retouch. Usually after this, I would go ahead and do some more color correction, brightening the image, making it more contrasting, and then sharpening it. If you're interested to see how I do all of those things, I will leave some more videos in the description down below. But this is it for the skin retouch. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope it was easy to follow. Give this video a like if you liked it, and let me know what kind of tutorials you would like to see in the future. All right, this is it, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye.